Hey, it's Silver, and this is Ravenswatch. So this is an action RPG that is going for kind of like a MOBA influence sort of thing, but it's not a MOBA, it's not a PvP game, it's actually either solo or co-op with up to 4 people, but it's entirely PvE. And the main idea behind it is it's an entire sort of RPG adventure condensed down into roughly 20 minutes. So you'll choose a character and you'll be plopped down in this big map. The map is randomly generated, sort of, but it also has specifically set features of it as well. And you'll have 24 minutes exactly in order to gather upgrades, gather levels, get stronger, and then you'll face the boss. And by the way, when I say 24 minutes exactly, I really do mean exactly. At exactly the 24-minute mark, you'll be pulled into the final boss fight, whether you're ready or not, so get prepared. Each character has a very different kit, and this is where a lot of the MOBA influences come in. Every character plays vastly different from each other. They all have a sort of basic attack as well as a power and a special skill of some kind and a defensive skill of some kind as well as a trait. And the trait is on the Q key and it generally sort of informs their whole kit. It's what ties their whole ability set together to become like a unified thing for their character. And there definitely is quite a bit of variety in characters already in the early access because, well, for one, it's just everyone plays very different from each other, but also there's quite a lot of different types of playstyles. You've got characters like the Snow Queen, who is like a ranged mage sort of character with piercing icicles and various slowing and chilling effects. And then you've got someone like Geppetto, who is like a puppet character that uses summoned puppets to actually attack enemies as well as being able to smack them around the place and a couple of other things like that, like a bomb that does, of course, AoE damage, but also heals in a big burst for any of the puppets it hits. So yeah, every character has a very different playstyle, but this means that you're encouraged to try all of them out because they also all have their own progression. As you complete or indeed are defeated in a match, you'll go back and you'll gain some XP depending on the various objectives that you completed and the enemies killed and all that stuff. And every character has their own separate XP gauge, and as you level them up, you'll unlock more upgrades that character can find while leveling up in their journey, but you'll also unlock some other items and things that everyone can find. So the way it works is once you're plopped down, you'll have a good-sized mini-map to take a look at, and you'll have a couple of different features that will be highlighted for you on the map just as a way to get you started, but most of the map will be grayed out, and you'll have to actually explore and find stuff to do. And there are all kinds of different features the map can have, each one having its own different rewards. For instance, you might find a chest icon, and that's a pretty simple one. It's just a treasure chest, but it'll be defended by enemies, so you have to go to the chest, defeat all the enemies around it, and then you can open it to get a choice between 3 different upgrades that are sort of relics that do different things. They all have various passive effects. Think of them kind of like items in a MOBA, like, you know, going to the store in Dota. This is the sort of same concept, but there are a lot of different items you can find in these chests, and also the symbols on the map will have a glow to them, a green, yellow, or red glow, and this is an indication of the general difficulty of that area. So if, you know, there's a chest with a red glow, it's going to have much harder enemies guarding it than a chest with a green glow, for instance. But the glow also is determining the reward rarity. So a chest with a red glow is going to have epic and legendary loot in it, as opposed to a chest with a green glow that might have some rares, but it's going to be very unlikely to have anything higher than that. So it is very much a risk-reward kind of scenario. And you'll also find, for instance, books. These are tomes that once you interact with them will spawn a wave of usually pretty tough enemies for you to face, and then it will start a timer, and if you're able to defeat all of the enemies before the timer runs out, then the tome will be openable and it will give you some sort of reward. Again, usually with all rewards in this game, you get a choice of 3 different things that you can pick one of, and for a tome there are various passive effects you can get, like a bunch of money to spend or a chunk of experience, for instance, which can be very useful because since you only have 24 minutes, you may or may not have enough time to level up, depending on, you know, how much combat you're doing, basically. So getting a sort of lump sum of experience all at once can be very helpful to help to make up for some of the time that you weren't necessarily fighting constantly because you were exploring for other stuff. There's also some more involved stuff here and there, like for instance, while exploring you may randomly come across a big red key, and there will be some big red locks, fittingly enough, and a couple of parts of the map that you might find. And once you have this key, you can open those locks and fight a boss, a mini-boss. It's not the same as the big final boss of the area, but it is a pretty tough battle. And there are a couple of different boss encounters, one of which starts with a bunch of enemies in a sort of cavern and then ends in a boss fight, the other of which spawns the boss immediately, but then about halfway through, the boss sort of disappears, spawns a bunch of enemies, and then comes back and transitions to a second phase. But either way, once you beat the boss, you get a really good chunk of experience for beating them, as well as some sort of extra rare artifact reward that you can choose from the lock that you unlocked once the boss is dead. You can also find some stuff that's even more involved than that, like for instance side quests. These are very high risk but often high reward. You'll usually find, at least in the current map that's available, you'll find one of the 3 little pigs that is there to build their house, and you gotta gather the material, whether it's straw or wood or whatever they want, and help them build a house. And you can actually partially complete this quest. They'll ask for about 20 of the material, but you can bring, say, like 15 if you want, and still win. The thing is, after you bring them the material, once this timer runs out, a bunch of enemies will start spawning and attacking the house. And if you want the reward for the quest, you have to defeat all the waves of enemies without the house getting destroyed. So the more material you bring back before the time runs out, the more health the house will start with, so it'll be an easier time to defend it. You can also find, especially from the mini-boss fights, you can find these cursed items as well. They're usually very powerful but have some sort of downside, and of course the idea there is to pick one with the best bonus but the downside that doesn't necessarily affect you as much. I should also mention that the game is going very much for a sort of twisted fairy tale vibe, with all of the characters you can play being like folk tales and legends, and the enemies and the side quests and everything is all related to like fairy tales and storybook stuff, but all with a very dark twist. I think this is a really good idea because I love OG fairy tales, because honestly they were already very twisted to begin with, but making them like a sort of dark fantasy, kind of creepy, a little bit Lovecraftian, and mix that in with them, and you get some really neat stuff, and that's what this setting is. It's a place called Reverie, and the idea is there are these Lovecraftian nightmares that are existing and sort of disrupting the fabric of reality, and it's your job as these mythical, legendary individuals to get strong enough to beat them. One important thing that you'll be looking for, by the way, are these tumors, they're called. They're just gigantic, betentacled things that you can smack and destroy, and once you destroy a tumor, it will lock you in an arena and spawn increasingly difficult waves of enemies, usually 3 or 4 of them at you, but if you manage to actually survive, it will permanently debuff the final boss's health. So for each tumor you destroy, the boss will have a significant chunk of their health taken away when you actually go to face them. You'll also be finding this currency called dream shards, mostly from destroying these big crystals around the place. There are even these huge nodes of crystal that are defended by a lot of enemies, but give you a bunch if you're able to harvest them. And when you go back to the sort of safe zone that you spawn in, there's a shop, and you can spend these dream shards at that shop to get things. You can spend them on consumables, which is sort of an odd word to use, because they're not really consumable in the traditional sense. They're not like a potion that you keep with you and then use up. They're actually like small permanent benefits. They last for the whole adventure, basically, and these can be things like extra damage, extra armor, extra health, things of that nature. They're small incremental improvements, but they're nice to have. And then you can also, whenever you level up, you'll be able to choose between 2 different passive traits that are usually pretty significant power increases that usually affect your kit in some way and give you extra abilities or alter your abilities to be stronger or various things like that. And these can also be upgraded. Once you have chosen these, you can go to the shop and pay an increasing amount of money to sort of level them up. It will increase their rarity and increase whatever it is that they do, make them stronger in some way. So this is a really important thing to do, because this is one of the biggest ways you can make yourself stronger in bursts, right? Because the consumables are small incremental upgrades, and you only level up about 5 times, so you can't level up a whole bunch to get stronger. So it's more about leveling up a small number of times and then spending money to improve what you got through those level ups to get stronger. The Master Nightmare itself, the final boss of the area, is definitely a challenge. It is a big, involved, multi-phase fight with a whole bunch of stuff going on, big tentacles thrashing around and lasers falling from the sky and all sorts of stuff. It is definitely challenging, but it is doable. And whenever you beat the final boss, you will also unlock the next Nightmare tier up. Nightmares are basically like difficulty levels. You'll start off with the basic difficulty, which is just everything at base level, but then you'll unlock Nightmare 1 and then Nightmare 2, and every time you're successful, you'll continue to unlock the next Nightmare tier up, and each nightmare tier has its own unique challenges for things like spawning nightmare creatures, which are like red tinted versions of creatures that are much stronger than others, to making you have 1 less raven feather. By the way, raven feathers are what you use to revive yourself. They're basically lives, so having 1 less life is a big deal, because dying is very easy in this game and healing is not that plentiful, so you got to be careful. I've personally managed to make it up to Nightmare 4 so far, but that's playing entirely solo, so I've still got a ways to go. The cool thing is you're definitely going to find at least one character that really clicks with you, right? You just try them all when you try the game, and they're easy to unlock, and once you have all of them, you can just try them and see what happens, and you'll probably find at least one that you really gel with. For me personally, Melusine is my favorite character. She's really fun to play. She's a mermaid and has ridiculous damage potential, but she's also very hard to control because most of her attacks don't actually come from her specifically. She controls this sort of wisp of water separate from her that follows your mouse around, and you have to stay still while you're controlling it and then switch back to control of her to dodge and then switch back to the orb of water to attack. It's a whole thing, but it's really fun. I find her to be a really interesting character, and that's kind of the cool thing about this game's characters is I find all of them to be really interesting except for one, which I'll get into in a minute, and I think they're all just really fun to play except for that one that I'm really bad with. But they've done a really good job of creating mechanically consistent but also very mechanically varied characters, right? Each character has a theme regarding their trait and stuff that ties all their abilities together and helps you understand the intention behind playing them, like how they're supposed to work. But they're all so different from each other that there's so much variety in those themes, and there's so many unique and creative mechanics to actually playing these characters that makes them a blast to try out. And if this is how all the characters are going to be, then I have a lot of hope for any future characters they might add, because if they're all this interesting and mechanically varied, then that's going to be a really cool roster to have once the game is complete. And so far we've seen them add one character, Geppetto, who is, like I mentioned earlier, a sort of puppeteer character that summons these puppets and uses them as his main way of attacking. He is your sort of minion character, although his minions aren't very mobile, but he can smack them around to move them and damage things at the same time. So he's really fun to use, and if that's how cool all the characters they're going to add are going to be, then yeah, this is going to be a very cool, very fully featured roster of characters once they're complete. The next large update is promising to add the entire second act of the game, so that'll be a massive update. It's going to add an entirely new map as well as an entirely new Master Nightmare to actually face, so you're going to have the second leg of your adventure available with all new themes and side quests and enemies and everything. So we'll see. That's basically going to double the amount of content that's currently in the game, more or less, so hopefully that update comes relatively soon. It's supposed to be summer-ish when they do that, and they've managed to keep all of their other roadmap goals so far because it's a very reasonable roadmap. It's very realistic, so yeah, hopefully it's like later summer there's going to be a giant update for the game, and I'll probably cover it again when that update comes out, because I'll want to actually show how much like the doubled content matters, and because that'll also be a really good indicator of the future trajectory of the game and its design. As for the early access, what's some stuff that I don't like, some stuff that's buggy, some stuff that needs changed? Well, for one, I found the game to be extremely polished, and I think that's why there's only one act in the game currently, is because they could have released like an unpolished, unfinished version of the second act just to say that they had it, but they didn't. They only released the first one because that's the one that's actually more done feeling, and it does feel done. It feels fully featured and complete. The characters in the game also feel very fleshed out with a whole progression system to each one and all sorts of new level up upgrades to unlock as you increase their capabilities and stuff. And there's a good amount of items, although there definitely could be more of a variety in relics to be found, although I'm not sure how much of variety they want, because obviously they don't want to dilute the pool of stuff you can find with too many things. So I'm not sure what their eventual goal for that is, but I do think there could be more rewards, more stuff to find, more rewards for the tome, more rewards for the chests, that kind of stuff, and perhaps some more cursed items as well. But the one thing that I would criticize the most is the character that I was talking about earlier, and that's Aladdin. I do not like this character at all. Now, for fair dues, I'm really bad with him, so it's entirely possible that my not understanding of how he's supposed to play is just because I'm not good enough with him, but I also think that he is kind of oddly designed, because almost every other character, well, really every other character, has a trait that ties in with all of their abilities and is used across their entire kit, but he does not have that. Instead of having a mechanic that sort of underlines their whole kit, he has two partial mechanics that don't really interact with each other. Basically, he has this sort of spirit point gauge that he can gain by using a certain skill, and then he can spend those points to empower his basic attack, but it only works on his basic attack, and you can only gain them with this other skill. Those are the only two abilities that actually benefit from this mechanic. It doesn't spread to the rest of his kit at all, which feels weird. And also, his his trait is a wish, and of course he only gets 3 wishes for the entire game. and the wishes don't make sense to me. One of them is to deal burst damage around him, one of them is to burst heal around him, and the other one is to give him some money and a consumable upgrade. So why would you ever do anything other than get the upgrade? Because there are plenty of ways to heal yourself, there are plenty of ways to do damage, but getting a sort of semi-permanent upgrade and some money seems like the obvious choice that every other thing is just a waste, because why would you ever choose anything else? Especially when you only get 3 of them per match. And this wishing trait doesn't apply to any of his other skills. It doesn't interact with them in any other way, and it doesn't interact with those points that he can gain from using that other skill that empowers his basic attack. So they're like 2 completely separate mechanics that both of them feel kind of unfinished, and they don't interact with each other at all. And that's why I don't like him as a character, really. I just feel that his kit doesn't make any sense to me. It's like, instead of having one underlying idea that informs how the character plays, it's got 2 partial ideas that don't interact at all. And I don't think that makes him a very fun character to play. One of his ultimates does give him extra wishes if you have enough money, so that's something, but still it's kind of weird. I should also mention, by the way, every character has an ultimate, but they only get it at level 5, which is the maximum level you can currently go to, so you've got to level up all the way to get access to your ult. Every character actually has 2 different ultimates that you can choose from, but at first you'll only have one of them active. The other one is unlocked by getting that character to like rank 6. So despite my misgivings with the character design of that one character specifically, I think this is an awesome game, honestly. I think it's a really promising start to an early access campaign that has already met several goals very effectively and is on track for another very big goal relatively soon. And I also think that it's a pretty unique concept of taking like an action RPG and condensing it down to a 24-minute adventure where you sort of level up and get more powerful and do all this stuff in a sort of roguelite fashion in a really fun, twisted fairy tale world with some really mechanically interesting characters that are very well designed for the most part. So that's my current opinion, at least on Ravenswatch. I'll definitely be revisiting it as it updates, because its updates tend to be very, very large. And I'll put the link in the description below this video to the Steam store page so that you can go and check it out yourself. It's only $20 right now, which seems like a really good deal for what's currently on offer. There's a lot of really solid action RPG gameplay that's currently available for just the $20. So thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.